Hello and welcome to another episode of MNI TV. I'm Heather Scott. I'm the Washington Bureau Chief for MNI, and with me again is John Shaw, our Senior Congressional Correspondent. Now, John, I know Congress is coming up on their traditional annual recess in August, but there's some big issues coming up when they get back. So what's the prospects of getting some legislation passed?
Well, if history is a judge, it's going to be rocky, and it looks like it's going to be a rocky fall. In brief, what happens is the House and Senate are on two different universes. The House, led by Republicans, has passed a budget which is quite conservative. The Senate has passed a Democratic budget which is quite left of center. They've been unable to resolve a big 10-year plan, and they're even fighting over 1 year, the 2014 fiscal year. They're $91 billion apart. They have passed none of the 12 spending bills. So the notion is when they come back in September is to pass a stopgap funding bill and to fund the government while they try to get the full year worked out. They're battling over funding levels for this bill. Some Republicans have said they wanted to fund the 2010 health care law. So it looks like there's going to be a battle to just keep the government funded. But as history has shown, they usually find a way to do it. So I think the prospects for them patching something together on the budget are relatively good.
So we should at least get a 1 year sort of continuing 1 year budget
to fund the government. Yeah,
right.
I don't see any major initiatives to cut the deficit. The Democrats believe, and the deficit is falling pretty sharply, and some in fact think there's too much deficit reduction in the pipeline. They need to pull back a little bit. But I think the focus will be to pass the 1 year spending bill, and I think they're on track to do that.
Right. Now the other big issue coming up, of course, is the which we've had issues with before, is the debt limit, the federal government's debt limit. They need to raise the debt limit again very shortly, sort of late September is what we're looking at now. What are the prospects for getting that approved without too much turmoil?
Well, turmoil is the operative word. In 2011, there was a lot of turmoil as they tried to pass it, and it's interesting, Republicans have drawn from that experience the notion that the debt ceiling is important to leverage to use. The Speaker has said he wants to use the same formula this year that he used 2011, which is to require spending cuts at least as large as the debt ceiling increase. President Obama left that negotiation and said, we're never going to do that again. We're not going to negotiate over the debt ceiling. He has said that he would be open to a separate or a parallel negotiation on other fiscal issues. But the language between the two parties is still very far apart. The Speaker continues to say he's going to use it as leverage, and the White House continues to say they're not going to negotiate over it. So I think it's going to be rocky, I think, on the debt ceiling.
So another kind of grim outlook for getting things done in Congress with the negotiations with the White House. Is there any area that you see where there is some common ground, where they might have some success?
Well, it's surprising because there's an effort to overhaul the tax code. And, of course, everyone is for tax reform in the abstract. It's when you start doing the details that people tend to differ. But you have an interesting moment in Washington where you have a Senate Democratic Finance Committee Chairman, Max Baucus, working very, very closely with the House Republican Chairman of the Tax Committee, the Ways and Means Committee, Dave Camp. They were just in Philadelphia recently to do some events together. A couple weeks ago, they're in the Twin Cities. They say they want to work on tax reform this fall. Critically, they differ on one huge issue, which is whether tax reform should create enough additional revenues. Baucus says do additional revenues to cut the deficit, fund other programs. Camp says you've already had tax increases, make it revenue neutral. So they're talking the good game on tax reform, but they still differ on a pretty fundamental issue.
Well, we'll have you back later in the fall to give us another update on how things are going. Thanks again, John, and thank you for joining us for this episode of MNI TV.